Welcome to my QUARANTALK. I'm a minority report member of the German Parliament. I'm very happy to receive Cinzia Bianco today. Thank you very much for taking time, Bianco.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Cinzia, you're some kind of the super expert on the Gulf region and the Arab Peninsula, working with the European Council on Foreign Relations. By the way, she's one of the very few persons I super trust in when it comes to that region, because she's one of the best experts I've ever seen in my life. We're talking about a pandemic, of course, and the impacts of COVID. What's happening to your region?
So thank you very much. First of all, what is going on is that the region that I cover more closely is composed by the 6 Gulf monarchies and Yemen. And the situation is very diverse. So we have situations like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait, where the impact can be contained both from a health sector point of view and also from an economic point of view. They have already deployed stimulus packages to cushion the impact. And then we have situations like the Saudi Arabia, for instance, and Oman, and of course Yemen, where you have different levels of difficulty in handling the pandemic. So in Saudi Arabia, for instance, while the health sector is coping relatively well, and the packages stimulus have already been approved, there are, of course, a number of challenges related to the crash of the oil price and the fact that that's a much bigger country with a much larger population. In Oman, you also add to that pre-existing financial strains, similarly to Bahrain, that make for a perfect storm from a financial point of view. And then on Yemen, you add on top of that a 5 years long devastating conflict, which already had tremendous consequences on the humanitarian level.
Let me start with Yemen, because this is the biggest disaster, and then after 6 years of a war, there is not something like a collective health system for the people. There are now first confirmed cases of COVID, right?
Yeah, there are cases in Aden, confirmed cases in Aden, in the south of Yemen, and also a couple of confirmed cases in the northern part around the capital, Sana'a. But that data is definitely not reliable on Yemen.
Because there are not enough test kits there?
There is no enough test kits by a long shot. And, there isn't even a full functioning health infrastructure. I mean, hospitals were unfortunately even the target of bombings and shellings. So the situation is that we are receiving videos, live testimonies of people just assembled in large courtyard, dusty courtyard, and those are supposedly quarantine facilities. So and of course, none of these people are registered as having contracted the virus. So the situation is really, really desperate.
Let's explain a little bit how the conflict started and what the situation now is. It started after the Houthi took over illegitimately, and then the legitimate government of the country asked for help of the Saudis. And 6 years later now, is it just Houthis against Saudi Arabia, or it's much more complicated? We saw now that the Southern Council now going rogue.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's become a war within a war within a war. So there had been, let's say, at least 2 different levels of this conflict. One was a domestic civil war, and the other was a regional proxy war already for years. So at the domestic level, you had, as you mentioned, the Houthi rebels, and they had taken over Sana'a. And of course, you had the legitimate government recognized by the United Nations wanting to fight them and get back control. And then on top of that, you had an intervention by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in favor of the legitimate government, and alleged support by Iran towards the Houthis. So you had this domestic and regional level. But as the war progressed, this has unpacked in several other conflicts. And in the south of Yemen, for instance, as you were mentioning, the Southern Transitional Council in April, at the end of April, declared a self-rule after years of small intensity fighting around Aden, which is, of course, the most important port of the country and where a number of very strategic resources are. And they want to have an autonomous rule there, separate from the legitimate government, although fighting together the legitimate government against the Houthis. But then again, you have another couple of areas in the southeastern tip of Yemen where tribal groups have rejected the declaration by the Southern Transitional Council. They don't want to be under their influence, and they are for the moment supporting the legitimate government, but long term analysts can already see that they have their own grievances.
So it's at least three parties now, right? We have this Southern Transitional Council being backed by UAE. This is about the government of the country being backed by the Saudis, and it's being backed by Iran. And there are tribal structures also going across the lines. What's the biggest problem of the people now? Is it the shellings? Is it the Houthis? Is it the blockade?
The biggest problem for ordinary people is health and food security, I would say. And the two are interconnected, of course. I mean, we know that the UN has already registered a chronic case of famine for stunning percentages of the population. And then they have, of course, had to confront cholera, at least 3 waves of cholera, and now COVID-19.
And the flood.
The floods and locusts, because there are swarms of locusts going from East Africa towards the Arabian Peninsula, and they have gone through Yemen and then even reaching Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Arabian Peninsula. So it's a combination of extreme insecurity at the level of their own survival, be that food, access to clean water, access to health. It's really a stunning humanitarian crisis.
The last question I want to ask on Yemen is about what we can do. You know, and the question of, you know, we got a lot of messages from the Saudis that they want to get rid of that they just want to stop, but they didn't. So what can we as Europeans do?
So I mean, the fact we as Europeans, likewise much of the international community, we thought that we could have just a humanitarian role and that we could help the people of Yemen without necessarily going into the politics and geopolitics of the war. And we tried to do that for years with all very good intentions, but that didn't amount to anything concrete on the ground. Unfortunately, the reality is that as much as in the case of Syria, unless you address the war, the geopolitics of the war, it's impossible to really get, you know, the help that people need delivered to them. So even in this case, I mean, as you were mentioning, Saudi Arabia is looking actively and quite intensely for a way out from Yemen. But the situation is so complex that I would argue that they can't really do it alone. We need a multilateral framework, and we need the European Union and individual European states, as much as the United States and the United Kingdom, to support this process as much as possible, draw in all relevant regional players, and find a negotiated solution that has at least any chance of being sustainable.
And let me just add one aspect of the daily life of the people to that, and asking you about this. Of course, we every day in our daily life see that social distancing is key. Can people in Yemen afford that? You know, for 6 years they survived by helping each other in their hoods, just going around distributing whatever they have and sharing with the other people. Can they afford such a thing like social distancing there?
They can't, for the reason that you were mentioning, that cooperation in the neighborhoods, human to human, has been absolutely crucial to try and survive. But also, to be very honest, I don't think that they are thinking in these terms. I mean, as we mentioned, COVID is one of their problems, and probably it's not the deadliest that they face. So they don't think as we do in terms of how serious it would be to catch that.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me quickly come to the other countries of the region. You mentioned the 3 ones who are doing well. All three of them are Kuwait, Qatar, and UAE are massively affected by the implosion of the oil price. How do they deal with that?
So yes, they are massively affected, but they also have a very large financial reserves, both in foreign exchange reserves and also assets that are part of their portfolio of investments. So it's about the cushions that they have to weather this period. They can do that. The sovereign wealth fund, the non-invested assets would be sufficient to weather a few months of difficult oil prices. So that's the difference between these countries and then a country like Bahrain or a country like Oman in particular and specifically. And to a certain extent, the tiny exception to this rule about Kuwait, Qatar, and UAE, it's Dubai, because Dubai is, as you know, the UAE is a federal state, and Dubai has been trying to develop a different model in political economy terms that is more vulnerable to this kind of shocks. They depend on international tourism. They were going to host the Expo 2020,
and
which
the
is
airports
now...
of Doha, of Dubai and Abu Dhabi are shut. Completely shut.
The airport is completely shut, and that's an important source. Expo 2020 is already officially postponed to 2021. So Dubai is a little bit of an exception because it has a little bit of a different model. But overall, the difference is between those who do have assets to cushion that and those who don't.
Just a soft question of interest for a lot of people. Are the preparation of the football World Cup some kind of affected of that in Qatar?
Yes, the on infrastructure has been halted as well, but not completely. And they still think that, you know, they are on time and they can do it. This gives me the opportunity to address another important angle to that, which is true for all the 6 Gulf monarchies, which are foreign workers. Workers from the Indian subcontinent, for instance, and other countries in the Arab world and the Middle East in general. They have been particularly vulnerable in this crisis. And so just to give you a number, in Saudi Arabia, around 70% of the cases, recorded cases of COVID-19 are have affected foreign workers.
70?
Yes, 70.
Okay.
So because, of course, I mean, the situation in which most often they leave the camps, the work camps, so it doesn't allow for social distancing, and their economic situation doesn't allow for just staying out of work. And of course, I mean, the relief packages and stimulus packages have not included foreign workers. So the state is not providing assistance to foreign workers as it is to their own nationals and citizens. So many of them cannot go back home to their countries because
of kafala, or because of okay.
No, because it's everything is shut.
Okay.
So just to travel is difficult. I mean, it can be arranged, but it's really difficult. And then they don't have money to survive, basically, because they send most of their money home to their families, and they live in conditions in which they are very prone to catching the virus. The bright side of that is that they have the right to health care, so they are treated. That's good, but still, I mean, it's a difficult situation. Just
to mention, to add one point to that, usually those people cannot just go home because of the kafala. If those countries where there is this kafala system, they need the permission of their companies they're working for to go home, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I'm already occupying your time for too long. Just one last question. After Aramco, the attacks of obviously Iranian backed forces on oil facilities of Saudi Arabia, we saw a lot of initiatives, diplomatic initiatives to calm down the situation. One of the most impressive ones to me was between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, who tried to find a way to come back to the table. Is that being now halted also, or how is that in these days?
So it was halted. So as you were saying, there was something going on between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but also something going on as via intermediaries between Saudi Arabia and Iran directly. And then everything kind of was halted in around January, and yes, I would say in January. And the reason is between Saudi and Qatar, the UAE, which is a crucial Saudi ally, is not ready one bit to solve the crisis with Qatar. And in the case of Saudi-Iranian indirect conversations, we had the killing of IRGC General Qasem Soleimani, which again threw everything back to square one. Now, COVID-19 does provide the excuse for cooperation, at least in the health sector. There is a different attitude, perhaps now, at least for instance, between Saudi and Qatar and between the UAE and Iran. We see that the UAE has been providing humanitarian assistance to Iran for COVID-19. And Qatar has been included in the different GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council meetings, where all the 6 monarchies come together to discuss issues for coordinating a health response. So we'll see, maybe there is the opportunity to de-escalate at least one bit.
Okay, thank you very much for this super deep overview you gave about the situation. Now, I could still go on asking you a lot of questions on the situation of human rights in Bahrain, for example. There are a lot of other things more to address. We didn't touch even Oman, but now it's over. Thank you very much, Cinzia, for taking your time. Thank you for giving us all of this information. Come back and we will the next talk are going to have with a very, very, not that smart, but definitely very important person the next day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.